I can say with pretty much total confidence, this is the most requested video for this channel in 2024. Since the Big Sky MX got released, it has been the thing that has dominated my inbox on all platforms, Discord, Instagram, and here on YouTube. Conversations about the Mercury X versus the Big Sky MX. And I understand why. We are living in an era where $600+ big box reverbs are just a norm of the market. Once upon a time, it made total sense to have two different reverbs on your pedal board. Some people would have three, a mono and two stereo verbs, but at this size and price point, most guitar players are priced out of even this and a supplemental reverb beyond that. And so I do want to kind of break my usual rule of not directly comparing products on this channel and talk about the differences, the strengths, and the weaknesses of the Big Sky and the Mercury X. But I will say, as we run into this, if you're looking for a definitive answer, I am only here to disappoint you. I am not interested in picking one of these for you, nor am I interested in casting judgment on which one I think is better. I can only say what their use cases are, what their strengths, weaknesses, and differences are, and I will, towards the end of this, tip my hand and reveal which one I tend to use more frequently. So let's start by talking about the kind of shared characteristics of these two devices. Both devices, the MX and the Mercury X, will feature stereo ins, stereo outs, USB-C, expression input over TRS, as well as 5-pin MIDI in and through. They will both draw on 9 volts of about 500 milliamps of power. Similarly, on their faces, they both have a screen for being able to menu dive and customize your sounds, as well as a couple of foot switches across the face and some kind of key controls on the face of the pedal, while still relegating a lot of control to the menu system. One of the key differences is, of course, going to be the number of switches. The Mercury X is 4 and the Big Sky is 3. Now let's get into some philosophical differences between the two. And I realize how heady and high-minded that sounds, but I do think that it is worth taking a little bit of a look at. Both are kind of all-in-one big box reverb, so they both will do real and imagined, esoteric and algorithmically driven spaces. However, I do think they both come to the table of reverb with a different set of first principles. Strymon in general seeks to recreate real things. I think that's very true of a lot of the kind of core designs Strymon has strove after over the years. Things like the L cap endeavoring to be a very realistic take on an analog tape echo, and the idea that their spring, hall, plate, room, cathedral, etc. all seek to be very realistic versions of these reverb sounds. It of course also drifts into the algorithmic and esoteric with things like cloud and choral and to a certain extent magneto, but I think that the first principles of Strymon's reverb algorithm design seeks to be real spaces digitized for your rig. Meris, on the other hand, seems to be using their reverb algorithms as a love letter to the reverb programs of old, which isn't to say that there are no real spaces in there. Obviously, things like the Lexicon 224 seeks to create digital versions of plates and rooms and halls and that kind of thing, and this thing does have a spring in it as well. But it is no secret that Meris is seeking to emulate vintage reverb algorithms, that it is a love letter to rack reverbs of the 80s and 70s, who in turn are emulating real spaces. But there's a difference between chasing down the space itself and chasing down a famous implementation of that space. And once again, I want to stress that I don't think that this is a judgment call in either direction. I don't think Strymon pointing directly at the thing is more or less valid than Meris pointing at the most famous version of the thing. But I do think that it is indicative of a second major difference between these devices, which is the algorithms in the Big Sky tend to edge more towards realistic sounds, attainable sounds in the world or in mechanics, whereas the Meris device really does seek to create absolutely impossible sounds, spaces, and movements. And this is a first spot where I will say, for fans of this, go this direction. I think the Big Sky MX is something that I refer to as the ultimate utility pedal. And I really do mean that. I think that if you are a session player, a hired gun player, or somebody who needs a device where they can quickly pull up an album-ready sound that is familiar to an audience, this is about as good as you can do in the reverb world, in my opinion. Not even in this video specifically, but I mean in the larger pantheon of digital reverb algorithms. The Big Sky MX is phenomenal. It does halls and plates and rooms and springs, cathedrals, and all these real spaces. It will also give you access to really interesting creative reverbs like Magneto and Cloud that sound, like I said, just album ready. It's the kind of stuff that feels familiar while still sounding fresh and interesting. And in that same vein, the Big Sky MX, now supporting a IR loader and editor in this device, does allow you to take very literally real spaces and put them in this thing as well. We're not talking algorithmic versions of a plate or a hall. We are talking about like physical captures of those spaces in this device. And so if you are seeking that very real reverb sound, the Big Sky MX kind of kills it. It is worth noting that with that IR loader available in this device, you can load in some stranger sounds to really kind of like flex the weirdness that this device is capable of doing. And it bears pointing out in this part of the discussion that one of the key and unavoidable benefits of the Big Sky MX in this comparison is the fact that it is in fact a dual reverb. You can run any two reverb algorithms in this device in parallel, in series, one into the other, or vice versa, or left and right separated amongst each other. This thing is capable of running any two algorithms while doing nothing to dumb down those sounds in the process. And let me put it this way, if I got picked up to go do a touring gig for another artist tomorrow, that is the reverb I would take with me. However, I do feel that there are hard limitations to how ambient, how experimental, and how esoteric the Big Sky MX is capable of getting. Like I said, I do feel that it is the ultimate utility reverb. And conversely, the Mercury X is effectively astral projection in pedalboard format. The reverbs in here range from classic Lexicon 224 style hall, plate, and room reverbs, as well as a pretty killer sounding spring reverb in this device, but it very quickly jumps into endless soundscape territory. We are talking about reverb algorithms that from the ground up are designed to be wide, vast, deep, and expansive, things that will decay for ages, constantly evolving, things that have kind of beautiful classic sci-fi trope aesthetics to them. And it's worth noting that all of that is without even getting into all of the customization of the reverbs in that device. It is able to do some of those more grounded things. Granted, I don't feel nearly as many grounded things as the Big Sky, and not quite as convincingly real sounding, but very much so the classic digital reverb algorithms of old, as well as adventurous and bold new creative droning soundscapes. This is the device for that kind of sound. So now that we've fleshed out the kind of core concepts behind each of them, let's talk about the positives and negatives of each and why those things are not actually objectively positive or negative, but situationally good or bad for you and your needs. Number one is going to be the process to dial in a sound. The Big Sky MX is much faster to get up and running. The ability to pull up an engine, have it sound good and most of the way there right at the outset, and requiring no more than maybe 2 minutes of menu diving to get 90% of where you need to go. It's really encouraging and does appeal to me. I am somebody who is doing less giant ambience these days, and I find that the real sounds and the ease of being able to avoid the menus as much as possible have put me in a position where dialing up a sound is fast, it's intuitive, and it's pretty lightweight, which I really like. It allows me to focus more on the writing process than the dialing in sounds process. The Mercury X, by comparison, is, to its credit, faster and easier than the LVX could ever hope to be. Meris's big box delay, I felt, required a decent amount of startup time for every new patch and would fail to reward you for not adequately exploring almost every page of the kind of modifiers. This thing has strong algorithms at its core, and being able to pull up the Cathedra from the Mercury 7 in this device and have it sound already exactly how you want Cathedra to sound is really encouraging. But to properly get the most out of the Mercury X requires a lot of startup on a per patch basis, because there is a lot you can do to these reverbs in the Mercury X. You can apply overdrive, dynamics, pitch processing, both mono and polyphonic. You can apply high pass, band pass, low pass filters, various types of modulation, and all of these things can be applied anywhere in the signal chain. We're talking before your dry signal enters the pedal, before the reverb, after the reverb, in the regeneration of the reverb. It's overwhelming to a lot of people, the amount of work that can go into designing your perfect reverb, and this thing really gives you the tools to do that. By comparison, the amount of difference you can pull out of a single sound in the Big Sky MX is fairly limited. Cloud is going to sound like cloud. You can make some changes to it, but it's going to sound like cloud. In the Mercury X, your reverb is just a starting place with which you can go 1,000 miles away. And so it's really going to depend on whether or not you want to make that hike every time. Another thing worth pointing out, and this is going to be one of the first hardware differences that I think matters, is editors. We talk a lot about the fact that both of these have menu diving, and that can repel some people. The Big Sky requires less menu diving than the Mercury X does. However, both of them have access to a desktop editor, with a caveat for both. The Big Sky MX can connect to the desktop editor Nixie 2 over USB-C and can manage the library of presets. Strymon has promised that there will be a Nixie update that will offer full device editing in the future, but it's not here yet. And it's not here despite the reverb having been out for a while now. I don't doubt that Strymon will make good on this promise, but I think it's very important to say, never make purchases on promised future updates. Only buy on what's available to you now. And as of now, the Big Sky MX does not have desktop editing support. Conversely, as of a couple days ago, the Meris Mercury X actually got a Predator, which is the terrible name for their editor, update that allows you to now edit everything about a preset on the Mercury X from your desktop computer, which is very, very useful and very, very helpful. However, despite having USB connectivity on the back of the pedal, the only way to engage with that editor is by connecting 5-pin MIDI to your system. So you basically need a USB to MIDI interface that will plug into the in and the out on the Mercury X, which means if you have it on a pedal board, you can't just plug your USB-C cable into it. You have to make sure that you have a system in place that will allow you to close that whole USB loop from your computer to the Mercury X on your pedal board and back again. And once you've done that, you also need to connect to it on its specific MIDI channel on the editor. These are not massive startup costs, but for a $600 reverb device that has a USB-C port on the back, I'm frustrated that I can't plug in and access it that way. And I know somebody in the comments will point out that it's actually more expensive to do it that way, and you are correct. But again, I say, this is 2024. We are living in a world of $600+ reverb devices. I don't think I'm being unfair. I understand there's a $70 difference between the two devices, but I don't think it's totally unfair to want to be able to plug in over USB to make changes to a digital device at this price point. At their core, both editors have their positives and their negatives. The negatives on the Big Sky being that it doesn't technically exist yet, and the negatives on the Mercury X being that plugging into it and setting it up for editing on your computer is just this much more of a hassle, requires this much more external gear necessary to actually do it, that I find it to be a little bit of a frustrating cognitive load. As far as the devices themselves go, they both absolutely nail what they each seek to do in kind. The Mercury X is absolutely the most amazing sci-fi reverb drone machine, endless ambience device on the market. I think there is no competition to it on those fronts. And in kind, the Big Sky MX is the most reliable, studio-ready, album-ready, get the gig style reverb you could ever hope to put on your pedal board. They are amazing at what they do, whether it is exploration or utility reverb. Those both come at drawbacks though. You might not want the startup cost when all you want is like the right realistic sounding plate for that Mercury X, and likewise, the Big Sky to many will sound safe. and overly familiar. In this comparison, it's also worth noting that the Big Sky is $70 more expensive than the Mercury X is, but does come with some additional kind of benefits, including those two algorithms at the same time, that dual DSP architecture, as well as the editor over USB. I did promise that I would kind of let you in on which one I tend to prefer in my day-to-day, and I will. And the answer is that for the genres I swim in these days, being more conventional, being more post-hardcore, rock, post-rock, and punk-based, I tend towards the Big Sky far more than the Mercury X. It finds itself being a very useful and practical ahead of my amplifier in mono style reverb, as well as its ability to kind of fit seamlessly into a mixing environment for room sounds in my projects as a post-processing device. But like I said, that is for my current sounds, and the split second I need something truly exploratory, I reach for the Mercury X as well. So I apologize for the non-answer, but like I said, I never sought to give you any real answers, only the insight that would let you choose which one is best for you. If you made it to the end of this video, I would love to know where you land in this discussion, which one is more valuable to you and for what reasons, what features and what sounds. I hope you hit that subscribe button and stick around for videos in the future, and thank you for watching.